Hi, everyone. This is Allison with the Love Sweetie podcast. This is going to be a bit of a bonus episode. I know that according to the original schedule, we were expecting to put out an episode 89, and continue Sweetie's story in early 1951. But it's the post holidays. I'm sure also that you can hear it in my voice. I've been a little under the weather, and a whole bunch of things combined to make that not possible. So, with that being said, I wanted to take the opportunity, though, this week to catch up some new listeners. And then, if any of our regular listeners have not had the chance to listen to episodes 87 about the storm and episode 88, Regina, um, this is a great opportunity to spend this time and go back and examine those episodes because I know the holidays have been busy for a lot of people, as they usually are. And I hope everybody's enjoyed a good holiday season. But for some of our newer audience, we've got a lot of content now that we're heading towards episode 90. And by the way, in 5 episodes, we're going to be at the end of season 2, and we're going to be in the middle of summer 1951 as far as the timeline goes. But that's really what I wanted to talk about today was the timeline. It was remarked in, I think, the last episode or the one before it. It's kind of amazing that we've gotten through a decade of Sweetie's life from her letters and what letters they've been. And we've also heard so much about Sweetie's family, especially about Dr. Demery, Chester. He always has some interesting excerpts for people to enjoy. So, what I wanted to do was to go through some of the content that we've covered in the last 88 episodes and point out some key episodes for new listeners, maybe some episodes that people have been listening recently from the early days of the podcast might have missed, or if it's too much to listen to everything. These are basically some critical episodes that contain some great content that I think it's really fun to explore, especially as we're in these winter months now. And I know it tends to be a time when people are listening to a lot of podcasts to call out some of like the great letters, the great content that's come before. Yeah, so I wanted to go through for our newer listeners the timeline of the 40s to talk about um, the last 10 years of letters as we head even further into the 1950s here, and then, of course, to go through these episodes. So I've got the website page open here, and that's really the guide of both the episodes and the timeline and everything that's happening there, and also the cast of characters. We're going to go to the various parts of the website. I made an episode about this, I want to say a year ago, exploring the website. The website's really grown since then. So I'm happy to take this opportunity right now to go through the updates that have been made. So for our audio listeners, I'll describe what's going on as we go through the website here. But YouTube, of course, you can see it on the screen. And again, the website, if you're following along on the website itself, it is mobile friendly, though some things are a little easier to view on the computer desktop, things like the family tree. That's www.lovesweetiepodcast.com. All right, so going to the homepage here on the podcast, there are 3 links. One has always been marked as coming soon and leads nowhere, and that's merchandise because there is not merchandise at this time still. But we have 2 critical links here. One is the podcast and one is Sweetie's scrapbook. The podcast link is going to lead to the major episodes. We're going to come back to this at the end as I point out some of my all-time favorites letter-wise and content, so that if you're looking for like maybe some of the best hits, everybody, story is subjective. Just like if you're reading a book, people like different stories over time. These are my personal favorites. So, but I'd be interested, please comment on the video if there's like a personal favorite episode, personal favorite letter that Sweetie wrote. I'd love to hear that feedback from the audience here. Clicking into Sweetie's scrapbook, for people that are new and haven't really explored this, the letters section really has not been updated. I've been trying to decide, and the reason behind this is which ones I want to put online, especially in the world of AI where there's so much, well, just issues coming up about content online and things like that. I'm a little wary of posting full text of letters here, but I want to put some of the big ones up there. So I'll let everybody know when that gets updated. The big ones that are updated, though, are the photos sections and the family tree, timeline, and podcast glossary. The photos, please explore them if you haven't had the opportunity to do so. It goes through various stages. They're organized by basically moments in Sweetie's life when she's at Parsons College. We've got the wedding photos, the honeymoon photos, pictures from Collingdale, pictures from Love Lane and Norwood. These are great historic photos. And then, of course, the scrapbook albums of the families, of the Demery family, her parents' side, and the Graham family, Lou's family side. There are many other photos that could be added to some of these pages, but the system is really just overwhelming. And I'm happy to reveal that I'm trying to think up some new content about archiving, because there's really thousands of photos that have survived, especially from the 40s and the 50s, and some before that, a lot of older photos. It's taking a while to process the collection. So also in the comments, let me know if you're interested in seeing some of that. I've been considering for a long time a series of videos showing how I'm organizing the collection. And I know that as a millennial, there's a lot of millennials. I think there's a lot of Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Z, and it's going to happen in the later generation, that are going to inherit a lot of, for lack of a better term, stuff from their family members. Things are going to be passed down, and it can be extremely overwhelming to know what to do with it. Knowing how to organize things in an archival sense and being able to make things accessible to other family members is extremely important to me. All right, but yeah, check out the photos page. There's a lot of processing to handle that, so I plan on showing how I am actually processing that whole collection, how I'm organizing that whole collection. It's really a huge, huge effort. It's going to take years to really get it right, but I think it's on the right track. Then I'd like to talk about the family tree, the timeline, and podcast glossary section. The glossary has been relatively updated. The family tree, I really love working on the family tree. I think the page looks really cool on the computer screen. If you're looking at it on your phone, might not turn out as well, but we've got the updates here, other family members, things like that. And yeah, I think it looks pretty great. The big thing is the timeline. So this has been fully updated to 1951, and I wanted to go back, and for our newer listeners, really wanted to talk about what's happened since 1941 in the storyline. So we really started the podcast with Sweetie in the fall of 1941, before Pearl Harbor, being in her freshman year at Parsons College, which was a liberal arts school in Fairfield, Iowa. It closed in the 70s, so it's not there anymore. But it was a liberal arts college. Her father, Chester, really wanted for his kids to have a great education, to finish college, things like that. She's really going, though, to follow her boyfriend. Classic tale. She's distracted in classes. She actually writes letters in classes, which are quite fantastic, showing that she's completely distracted about things. And then what happens is what happens to all the schools at the time. End of the fall 41 semester at college, Pearl Harbor happens. And finals are suspended at this point. Can you imagine going to finals week, or planning to go into finals week, and then just the world changes overnight? And all of a sudden America's at war. Well, what happens? College has to say, we got to take your final exams in January of 1942. So they extend the semester, but they send all the kids home at the end of December for the holidays. So she finishes out that fall semester in January 42 because of Pearl Harbor. And she decides she's not going to stay. She and her roommate, her friend Lucille Miller, who's from another county. They're both out in Iowa. They decide they're going to go to a business course, which is really something that is done pretty frequently. At the time, her father, Chester, didn't really approve. He didn't like this idea, but Sweetie, once she sets her mind on something, she does it. And Lucille and Sweetie go to Ottumwa, Iowa, which is a city in the southeast portion of the state. When she gets there, she's having a pretty fun social life in Ottumwa. She's taking this business course, which is really secretarial work. So typing courses, stenography, really, really big. She wants to make herself useful and try to get into the civil service during the war. And there is a base being built out in Ottumwa, Iowa, and that is NAS, or Naval Air Station, Ottumwa. We have to remember, in 1942, the Air Force didn't exist yet. So this is naval air. So if people are wondering why the heck is there a Navy base in Ottumwa, Iowa? It wasn't the only one in the Midwest, as we're going to find out in the story, and there were more beyond that. But that's really because they're training pilots out there in the Midwest. A lot of open space for planes, for people to be training in planes. and it's a good idea to do it away from the densely populated cities. So that's what the military is going to be doing. So this base is going to be built, and when she finishes her business course, Sweetie's going to have the opportunity to go and work at that base, NAS Ottumwa, when it opens, first with the contractors, and then it's going to transform later down the line into a full job with the United States Navy. She's going to have some various relationships. If you've listened to the episodes, you know this. First, there was Ed at college. That ended. Then there was David Chase, who proposed to her by mail, and she didn't respond to, or if she did, we have no knowledge of it. At least that was left lingering for almost 2 years. And it got kind of awkward after her wedding to Lou. So if you missed that, that's some good content to check out. But she has a couple other boyfriends while she's living in downtown Ottumwa. And then, of course, in August of 1943, she reports to her sister Jean, her closest confidant, that she's met this man, Lou Graham, who has a smile in his voice. They've been talking on the switchboard, her in the women's office at NAS Ottumwa, him working on the switchboard. So they are falling in love while chatting over the Navy lines at the base. And 4 months later, they are married in the living room of her close friends and neighbors, the Corey family. And those are the pictures that we see online. The thing is, with a lot of the women getting married at this timeline, at this time, there's no idea what's actually going to happen for Lou. Now, Lou is working as a mechanic. He's actually an aviation machinist. And he's working on the equipment. He's working on the planes. And it's not clear if he's going to be sent overseas or not. But he has been he's been at the domestic base for a long time. And there's always this fear that Sweetie has that Lou is going to be sent overseas, and then what then? And Mrs. Corey in particular, one of the neighbor, has this prophecy, basically, is going to be what happens if Sweetie gets pregnant, and then Lou is called to go overseas. By July of 1943, Lou is reassigned from NAS Ottumwa to NAS Hutchinson, which is in Kansas. It's a city that is known for salt production, and Lou is going to go there. At first, they think it's only going to be a number of weeks, and then he's going to be shipped overseas. Sweetie makes the determination if all she's going to have with Lou is another 6 weeks, then that's what she's going to have, and she follows him to Hutchinson, Kansas. As it turns out, he's there until at least the early spring of 1944. So she and Lou spend about 7 to 8 months in Hutchinson, Kansas at NAS Hutchinson. Lou finally gets his orders in early 1945. I think I just got the dates wrong there. He was shipped out July 1944 to Hutchinson, and then goes spring 1945. When this happens, she's able to reconnect with her brother Bob, who has been a pilot in the U.S. Navy. And we should also note that her brother Frank is in the United States Army and has also been serving overseas. So she's got 2 brothers in the service actively. And of course, her husband Lou. She's able to link up with her brother Bob and with Bob's wife Florence. And they spend some time together in New York. And all of this is detailed on the timeline here. So if you go to the timeline page, we get this information. Finally, Lou is sent overseas, over to England. And he actually writes a couple of letters from England, and we've gone over them in the podcast. Andrew's done a wonderful job narrating as Lou. So I strongly suggest people take a look at those. The thing is, Lou gets to England, and about a week later, it's victory in Europe is declared. So thankfully for Sweetie, he doesn't get caught up in active combat. He stays at the base. He's fixing planes in England. But at the same time, Sweetie is pregnant at this point. And with Bob being sent overseas, she goes home to Iowa for her basically to have to be surrounded by family while she's pregnant, to be with her sister Jean. That's essentially it. She wants to be in the hospital at Des Moines. She doesn't want to have the baby at home, which her father, being a doctor, he could deliver a baby basically anywhere. She wants to be in the hospital in Des Moines. As it turns out, her father, Chester, is going to deliver his grandson at the hospital in Des Moines. So I guess everybody gets what they want. Chester gets to be involved with the whole thing, and she's at the hospital, and Jean is there. Lou gets home from service a little after the baby's born, and that basically concludes season 1. We end season 1 with the end of World War II and with the birth of Sweetie's son Louis, who is, of course, named for his father. We have Louis Graham Sr. at this point, which is Sweetie's husband, and Louis Graham Jr., who is my father. And we denote the difference in the letters because the senior is noted as Lou, and the son is noted as Louis. Now, the only other thing we know that happens at the very, very end of fall 1945, because there really is not letter content from this time period, Sweetie's at home with her folks, so she's not having to write to them, is that Lou's father, Samuel Graham, passes away in southeastern Pennsylvania, in Collingdale. He had been sick, and there's some earlier content in the episodes about this. As we head into season 2, we find out at the beginning of the letters that Lou has returned to his family in southeastern Pennsylvania and has called on Sweetie to bring Louis and get to Pennsylvania. Sweetie's resistant to leave her family in Iowa. She certainly doesn't want to leave her best friend Jean, and it's post-war, so she's figuring out what she wants to do. The war is over. Lou's trying to figure out if he should get a job other than being in the Navy, even though that's what he knows. We should note here that Lou never graduated high school, but he's really great with his hands, and he's really just a smart, street smart guy, and he can find opportunities, but he's living at home with his mother, Sydney, in Collingdale. So finally, Sweetie just makes the decision to join her husband to bring their son to southeastern Pennsylvania, and this happens at the very end of March of 1946. However, horrible news strikes the family about a week or two later, and that's the news that tragically Sweetie's brother Bob was co-pilot of a plane carrying 11 people, including himself, that had a horrible crash right south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was a routine flight. The plane crashes, and everybody who was on board, all their lives were lost, including her brother. Sweetie's devastated at this, and she's also devastated that she's not at home with her family to be together in this grief. She's essentially feels very stranded in southeastern Pennsylvania because she doesn't know the people here. She doesn't have the relations with the people in southeastern Pennsylvania. So this is probably one of the hardest times of Sweetie's life emotionally as she's dealing with this and as there's this changing. And that's where we find ourselves at the very beginning of season 2. However, things start to turn around when Sweetie and Lou were basically able to move out from living with Sydney, who was in her own grief, having lost her husband Samuel in the fall of 1945. Sweetie, Lou, and Louis moved to 37 South Love Lane in Norwood, Pennsylvania. That's in Delaware County. It's close to Philadelphia. She's really excited to be able to get her own place and basically just have some space. At the same time, Chester Demery has bought his own farm out in Lacona, Iowa at this point, and he's working on that. So there's a little bit of a storyline in both areas going on. She spends time, basically, this family spends time in Norwood, and we get, the post-war days and the vibe and what's going on there. Finally, by August of 1947, Sweetie and Lou get to take their honeymoon. They didn't get to take one during the war. And she gets a sewing machine, which is really important. There's a picture of the sewing machine actually on the website. It still works, and it's still with the family. It really is one of the major items. I wish one of the typewriters survived, but alas, it has not. I've asked my dad, are there any typewriters that Sweetie used to write her letters that have survived the test of time? And he said, no, there are not. But I'm happy to have the sewing machine, and this huge story, because she waited 16 months for the sewing machine. In 1948, we get some other information that starts coming up. Lou's sister, for example, gets married in the summer of 1948, and This is going to be the time period in which Sweetie is going to ask her husband Lou, can we try it in Iowa? And they're going to move the family back to Lacona, Iowa. Lou's going to essentially try to be a farmer. It's going to be really apparent pretty fast that Lou's miserable and does not want to be a farmer. And through some of the later letters, we also find out that Chester suffers a heart attack in Lacona, Sweetie's father, and he's going to choose to cope with that in not a good way. And we'll talk about that in a moment here. But basically, Lou is going to say, this is not a good opportunity for me. I need to go back to the southeast of Pennsylvania, and I need to do what I do best, which is be in the Navy. That being said, at this point, he's left the Navy after a number of years of service, so he actually winds up joining the United States Merchant Marine. The Merchant Marine, through this in the early part, it was December of 1948, heading into the early part through about June of 1949, Lou's going to take various cruises on oil tankers. He's going to go first to the Middle East, and then he's going to go south to Venezuela. We actually have content from Lou with regards to all of those trips. I find it interesting that we were talking about the tanker going down to Venezuela. There's the stuff in the news right now about Venezuela and about oil. This has been a long history of American companies going down to Venezuela for oil. So it's really relevant, actually. So if you want to hear about how it was done back in 1949 and where the Merchant Marine went for the oil in Venezuela, I encourage you strongly to look into that content. And then finally, he's going to save up enough money, in which case Sweetie's going to rejoin him. And they're going to look for housing because they don't live in Norwood anymore. They're going to stay temporarily at Collingdale, which is also about to be sold. The Graham family home in Collingdale in Darby, Pennsylvania. Elizabeth at this point has moved out. She's living elsewhere with her new husband, which Elizabeth, also known as Dit, you'll hear that name in the podcast. Lou's nickname for Elizabeth. And they're going to buy a house. They're finally going to settle on buying a house. They're not renting at this point. It's the first time they're going to buy a home. And that's at County Line Road in Hatboro, Pennsylvania, because Lou is going to rejoin the United States Navy at NAS Willow Grove, which is Naval Air Station Willow Grove, an extremely large base that until recently, and I mean recently in the last 10 to 20 years, was still operational. This was a major, major naval air station. And he is going to get a full-time job back there as the family lives at County Line Road. The rest of the history of the 40s, really, is them settling in at County Line Road, and then we head into the 1950s, in which they are still at County Line Road making connections. They're getting into the antiques business, and that catches us up to basically where we are. I mentioned that in 1948 in the fall that Chester had had a heart attack. It's going to get revealed in a series of secret letters. To this day, I have not yet revealed the content that Lou ever found out about this, and I have confirmed that my father Louis never knew about this. But there is a correspondence between Laura, Sweetie's mother, Jean, Sweetie's sister, and Sweetie about the fact that their father, Dr. Demery, Chester, is self-medicating with morphine, at least at the point after his heart attack in fall of 1948. At the storyline where we are so far, which is the beginning of 1951, it is my understanding that Chester is still doing this. There is a definite end date to this. We are not there yet. So if people are wondering if there's going to be follow-up on that story, yes, there will be, but we are not at that point yet. But from that, what we can tell is that this is still going on at the point in the story that we're at now. And it's a tough thing. Sweetie's basically keeping something from Lou, but she's protecting her family, or she believes she's doing the right thing with that. We'll see how all that goes. So that's basically the timeline as it is for any of our newer listeners who might have missed some of the episodes of the past. I strongly encourage you to go back into the timeline page. It's really not that long. I've tried to keep this as precise as possible, despite the vast majority of information that we have. But going back to Sweetie's scrapbook, going back to the homepage, let's go now into the podcast. On the podcast page, it defaults to season 2, but in that top paragraph, you can actually click a link to go to season 1 of the podcast. I wanted to call out some really great episodes and just go through the episode list with everyone. Episode 0 is essential listening if you're getting into the podcast. It's about 15 minutes. It's audio only for audio listeners. This sets up why this project exists. I'm so grateful to all of our listeners of the Love Sweetie podcast. I'm so grateful to Jamie with her involvement with this project since the beginning. My grandmother's story deserves to be told. And this episode starts with some of the text, an excerpt of the text from her final letter that I've located in the collection. The letter's from 2007. What she writes in this letter is so devastating that it has shown me that my purpose in life is to basically disprove what my grandmother wrote. That'll make sense when you see the excerpt. I'd like to tell the audience that as I sit at my desk right now recording this, that letter is in the drawer right below my right hand with its envelope. It's such shaky handwriting, which is the result of my grandmother, Sweetie, suffering from Parkinson's at the end of her life. Just everything about it is utterly haunting. But again, it sets the tone for the why of the whole story. And I strongly suggest if you haven't listened to episode 0, You, Me, and the Gatepost, please listen to that. It sets up how all these letters were found, how they all survived. Shout out to Jean with regards to that and why this is a podcast in the first place. I mean, you can't get after that. You really start with episode 1. Don't forget the stovepipes. I mean, January 7th, 1941. This letter, when she travels back to school, says everything it needs to in the opening excerpt. If you even want to fast forward to the content of that letter, that's fine. She describes the dialogue of a bus driver as she's heading back to Parsons College from the holiday break of 1940. And it just sets the tone of who Sweetie is as a person. Episode 2 also has a really great letter in it. This is going to be the letter from September 28th of 1941. This letter is, in my mind, affectionately called Burn After Reading. It's the one that at the bottom, Sweetie instructs Jean to burn it because of the relationship problem she's having with Ed, and she doesn't want other people to know. Thank you, Jean, for not doing what Sweetie said and not burning it. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. And then we have the one from the day later from her father, which shows just how in tune he is with his kids. So we get some early Sweetie content. I really suggest if you're doing some excerpts of these letters, again, check out the letters on September 28th, September 29th, and episode 2, what we've tried to do about her case. Can't get better. There is the one when we get to episode 4. By the way, episode 3 at the end, if you never heard the speech that President Roosevelt gave to Congress after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, you can listen to it at the end of episode 3. It is played there. It's a government speech, so you can hear the audio there, no problem. Episode 4, we have a very interesting letter in which Sweetie recounts what her professor was saying in class about the attack on Pearl Harbor. We get a first-hand account there. Some information that seems a little counter to maybe the current narrative about Pearl Harbor in a little bit of a way. So it's just fascinating to see that. Fast forwarding to episode 7, I'd say this one's a great episode because this is the episode in which she starts her work at NAS Ottumwa. And that brings up the fact that the administrative building of NAS Ottumwa is still standing and has been restored and is open to the public at specific hours. I've been out there. I've had the pleasure of visiting the site of NAS Ottumwa and talking with Stephen Black, who was so important to the survival, the restoration effort there. And there is a bonus episode on NAS Ottumwa that I strongly encourage you to check out. It's an interview with myself and Jamie and Stephen talking about the efforts to save this location. There's also a bonus episode on NAS Hutchinson. That was one that was not saved, but I felt it was important to go over some of the details about Hutchinson. So there's episodes on both of the NAS buildings. of the history of those buildings and what's there now and all of that. So especially for people who are World War II buffs that might not know as much about the Midwestern Naval Air Stations, I strongly suggest that you check out that content. There's a lot of information here about Ottumwa. I really, really have to stress episode 14. This is the wedding episode. This recounts the wedding of Sweetie and Lou. And then, of course, we have episode 16. Actually is really important. Lou gets a faraway look in his eye. This is the one where we go through some of the Graham family history. So if you want a good deep dive onto the Graham family history, it's really the second half of that episode goes into it. Episode 18 is the most popular episode of the whole podcast. That's the one we're going to the Shore Patrol Station, or the old Demery Spirit. If you have not heard we're going to the Shore Patrol Station and you are a listener to this podcast, you are in the minority here. The fact that there's a Shore Patrol in Iowa is always endlessly amusing to me, but this speaks to Sweetie's spirit on a daily basis, and her ability to tell a story is just really, really incredible. There's also a bonus episode for Sweetie's wedding album. If you'd like to see the pages of the wedding album, we go through that. And then there's episode 23. Oh my goodness. Pes Humani. If you know, you know. Chester is and he's a very interesting doctor. He's a very interesting doctor. I'll just leave it at that. You decide for yourself about Pes Humani. Episode 25, Essential Listening. That episode's called Your 2-Bit Puddle Jumper Had a Flat Tire. This is the episode that recounts Sweetie's traveling from Ottumwa and relocating to Hutchinson, Kansas, and the train breaking down on the way, and everything that goes with that. So really, really great episode. Episode 27, I believe, is going to be one of the most important episodes down the line of the 40s, mostly because of the letter that Chester writes to Frank, his son, and he recounts the unfortunate, tragic death of a soldier who is home on a furlough, and an accident happens, and he is asked to come out and try to help to save the individual, and he is not able to do so. His narrative, Chester's narrative of what happened, is just some incredible content. And, you know, I looked up this soldier, and basically all that's left about this soldier online is a very short obituary, about a paragraph saying that they passed away. It's narratives like Chester's that fills in so much of the missing information as to the history and what happened, and his ability to paint a scene, knowing that he's trying to save this soldier. It's a haunting episode, but I have to recommend it for that reason. I think that it deserves far more listens than it's gotten. So again, that's episode 27, At the Edge of a Cornfield, and the first letter in that episode is the letter from Chester about what happens with this young soldier and how he tries to save him, and it doesn't. He can't save him. Very, very haunting. As we continue, there's some more content in Hutchinson. A lot of Sweetie wants people to visit her, and nobody is. And we get some interesting content in there. We start to get the hint at this point in these early episodes in the 30s, like 30, 31, 32, that Sweetie's thinking about starting a family with Lou. But then we get the Christmas episodes, the Thanksgiving, the Christmas episodes, and we start to get the information that Samuel isn't doing well, Lou's father. So really interesting content through here. And I'm just scrolling through for our audio listeners, going through the roster of episodes. Episode 40, Jolly Old England, is one of the episodes in which we get Lou's perspective from him being overseas, stationed in England at this point. Episode 42, really big. This is the one that goes into the very ending of World War II. We have a discussion. We also talk about David McCullough's Truman book here, because it's the discussion of the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I've actually been to the Truman Presidential Library. There's an amazing artifact out there. A picture of that is shown in that episode. But we wrap up World War II with episode 42, and then the finale of season 1 is episode 43. I'll send her 24 red roses, which is just great to listen to the finale episode. Going into season 2, episode 44 is important to set the stage of what happens. Episode 45 was one of the hardest episodes of the podcast to record. This is the episode, it's titled To Say My Last Goodbye. This is the episode that covers what happened to Sweetie's brother Bob, the crash, and the immediate communications afterwards between Sweetie and her family about the passing of her brother, up to the point where we get to the date of the funeral, which Sweetie is not able to be at, and this absolutely is devastating to her. Continuing on through these episodes in season 2, we've got an amazing discussion of the Pennsylvania Turnpike in episode 50, the highlight of the entire trip. Discusses how the Pennsylvania Turnpike was at that point. Really, really an amazing thing. And then I would say the honeymoon episode 55, is really, really great as Sweetie and Lou head up to Niagara Falls. Just really, really excellent. We start to find out in the later episodes in the 50s that Elizabeth is engaged, and we wonder if it's going to happen, basically, because Elizabeth has a little bit of an attitude about things, but she's good. It's going to go forward, but we get into these episodes. Episode 57, episode 58, so on and so forth, about Elizabeth's engagement. In episode 61, we get the setup of Lou joining the Merchant Marine. At this point, we get to see pictures of the Demery family farm. This is a great episode for that. Those pictures are in an album on the website as well. But we cover what happens in the fall of 1948, and we piece together what's going on just as Lou goes into the Merchant Marine. And then episodes 62, 63, and 64 are a trilogy of episodes from Lou's perspective, because Sweetie's at home and not writing, but he wrote these amazing letters, and he took pictures of what he saw on a ship called the SS Atlantic Transporter when he was in the Merchant Marine. The first one has to deal with his cruise towards the Middle East across the Atlantic Ocean. That's episode 62, SS Atlantic Transporter. And then we have the dual episodes, episode 63, To the Sweetest Girl in the World, and episode 64, I Love You With All My Heart. The first one of those two, episode 63 recounts what he's seeing as he continues on the map, and we show a map on the screen to Port Said in Egypt, and he goes through the Suez Canal, and he winds up basically in modern-day Kuwait, where the tanker fills up with oil and then starts its return trip across the Atlantic Ocean. Episode 64 has to do with the South American content, with the trips down to Venezuela for oil. So, again, really timely with what's going on in the news as far as discussions about Venezuela and oil. There's some original content about the Merchant Marine going down there in the late 1940s. But again, episode 62, 63, 64 special trilogy, all with Lou. And then we reconnect with Sweetie as she returns from Iowa with her family, and they wind up in Hatboro, Pennsylvania, County Line Road. And she talks about buying the house for a while because it's a big process to buy a house. So there's some really, really wonderful content there. Episode 70, really important. Shake Hands with a Farmer. This one talks about one of the local farmers who really helps them out taking care of the land. And at the end, we get some more information about this relatively unknown farmer family from back in the late 1940s. Episode 71, leaving that episode and continuing in the timeline, very important, Determination and Cussedness. This is the episode in which we find out that Chester is self-medicating with morphine back in Iowa. So if you want to explore that content, that can be found there. At the same time, Sweetie's mother, Laura, has a medical scare, and Sweetie's wondering if she should head back to Iowa, but she ultimately does not. Laura writes that she's okay. And then we get into episode 74, The Fire. This episode is a must listen. This is the episode in which Chester reveals that he accidentally burned a part of his land, and the town comes to help him out. Why did he burn part of his land? Well, he thought he could make some photos look really cool by having fire in the photos, and it gets out of control for very obvious reasons. And it's my belief that the town was never told the truth about how this fire started. So I believe it is important to set the history straight with this episode, but the narrative from Chester about the fire is exceptional here, and it really shows his ability. And there's going to be a lot of Chester narrative coming up in future years here. So, yeah, the fire, really important. Convenience of mechanical diagnosis that follows also has to do more with Chester and with taking care of patients in the early part of 1950. So if you want more Chester, 74, 75, get a lot of Chester content, but the fire is exceptional. Then as we head into some of the later content for 1950, we get Sweetie getting her first television, and this story is told over a course of a number of episodes, but really episode 79 is the big one that talks about some of the elements of television. And we also find out more about Joe, Lou's brother, his acting career that he has in New York. So a lot going on there. In episode 81, we talk about the beginning of the Korean War. That details the beginning. Large commitment in this podcast to really accurately talk about what's called the Forgotten War, the Korean War, because it really shouldn't be forgotten. And episode 81 is important for that reason. It's the start of the Korean War, called I Suppose You Heard, Brother Truman. And Sweetie really starts watching what's going on at the UN on her new television set. You know, it's that idea of the war really brought into people's living rooms. That's been going on since the Civil War, and now it's things like the UN hearings happening live on the limited channels that they have, but happening live for people, for the American people to understand what's happening. And then as we head up to the episodes we're at right now, we have the birth of Little Marguerite, Elizabeth's daughter, in the episode 83 called Little Marguerite. That's going to be super important down the line. And then we have episode 85, Up to Doylestown. I'm going to go hint, hint, hint here. Go back and listen to episode 85. If you missed episode 85, there's a lot of content there that, let's just say, Easter eggs galore in episode 85, and that'll make a lot more sense as we head into season 3. And then we have episode 86, which has the famous letter from Chester in a bottle. Yeah, so Chester writes a letter, puts it in a bottle, buries it, and hopes that someone will read it in the far future. Chester is getting his reward for this very, very far in the future, not in the way I'm sure he ever expected it would be. So that is in episode 86. And then that catches us up to the present day. The storm in episode 87, Remember the Good Old Days, and Regina about the antique. For the end of season 2, we have 5 episodes left for the end of season 2. Episode 89, Wrestling with My Conscience. Episode 90, As Long as You Both Shall Live. We've got a lot to resolve about what's going on with Jean and Glenn. There seems to be some tension we've left off with. So we'll look into that tension. And then episode 91, Mrs. Brown, which has to do with Elizabeth's in-laws. We'll talk about that. And then episode 92, which if people are looking at the website, you can see episode 92. If I Had Hunted Another Trillion Years. Ends with a lot of content from Chester. Actually, in that episode, we only see one letter being revealed from Sweetie. And that episode kicks off with the letter on June 5th of 1951, the first time we're going to hear from Jean herself. The first letter, amazingly, that survives in the collection from Jean herself is that one. I'm so excited to get to that. And then we'll start with season 3. Check out the website. I strongly encourage people to go to the season 3 link on the website and really look at the page on your computer and see if you can start to see something in the background as a hint for what's going to happen in season 3. And remember that episode 85, Up to Doylestown. Anyway, I wanted to run through all of that, especially for our newer listeners. Please check out these episodes. If you've missed some of them, hopefully this episode has served to help you, to guide you through some of the content that we've covered in the last 80 plus episodes. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We'll get back to the Sweetie's letters next week, and we're barreling towards the end of season 2, and I'm so excited to get to the content of season 3 in early February of this year. I hope everybody's had a good holiday season, and with that, I think we're going to conclude. Bye, everyone.